story you are about to see is true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent.
You're traveling through another dimension. A dimension not only of sight and sound, but of mind. A journey into a wondrous land whose boundaries are that of imagination. Your next stop, the Twilight Zone.
The FIDE Grand Prix from Paris, France, 2013, being played from September 21st to October 5th, 2013. Great players, great tournament. Here's the upcoming schedule for the FIDE Grand Prix, Paris 2013, taking place from September 21st through October 5th, 2013. It's going to be a great tournament. This is a list of the players in the FIDE Grand Prix. Wang Hao from China, Thomas Shesky, who just played really well in the Grand Prix tournament in Norway, Ponomarev, former FIDE world champion, Karl Nakamura, number 5 in the world, Ivanchuk from Ukraine, one of the most amazing players in the world, Alexander Grischuk from Russia, another huge player in the top 5 in the world, Anaskiri from the Netherlands, great young player, Boris Gelfand from Israel, formerly from Russia, world champion contender. Just a few months ago he played Anand for the world championship. Fressonnet from France, rated over 2,700, exciting player. A guy I like a lot as well, Dominguez from Cuba, rated 2757. I think it's the highest he's ever been. Fabiano Caruana, Italian-American, top 8 in the world. And Bacro from France. If there's anyone on this list that's below 2,700. It's going to be a great tournament. Here's a picture of all the players that are participating in the FIDE Grand Prix in Paris 2013 from September 21st through October 5th. As you can see, the average rating is 2746. Unbelievable. Category 20. This is going to be a great tournament. Don't miss out on any of these games. Hi folks, John Cordisco back again with another great chess video for you. This is a hell of a game. This is from round 4 of the FIDE Grand Prix in Paris 2013 between Alexander Grischuk from Russia, rated 2778, number 6 in the world as white, and Fabiano Caruana, Italian-American, under the Italian Federation, rated 2781, number 5 in the world. It's a King's Indian, so of course it's going to be a crazy game, which is the ones we always like, of course. Grischuk has white, Caruana has black. Knight to f3, knight, pretty much standard stuff. I'll breeze through the opening a little bit. Bishop, d6, knight c3, castle z5. I love King's Indian games. I love to go over them. It always leads to really good games. They're really good to watch anyway, maybe a little crazy to play. Queen to c2, rook e8. Now right now I've got my Fritz 13 computer off screen. It's only about a third of a pawn advantage for white, which is the same as even. Oddly enough, if you run this program anyway, from the beginning position, it shows a third of a pawn advantage for white even before the first move, so take it with a grain of salt. Rook to d1, e4, chase the knight away, knight to d2. Now of course, like most King's Indians, you're going to see a lot of weird position here and a lot of weird maneuvering. Queen e7, b4. I find it interesting. I usually have crazy kingside play with the pawns. Now we're seeing some queenside advancing with white. It's interesting. Knight to f8. See, I told you. You're going to get a lot of weird moves here in the King's Indian. Bishop to b2 and h5. Typical King's Indian. Rook a to c1. Bishop up. Knight to b3. He wants to go c5, as you can see here. Wants to open things up. He's hoping black takes, white takes, and I'll tell you, these two pawns here are going to run the board. Of course, he goes knight to h7 from f8. That's the reason why I went h5. Not the only reason, but it brings his knight in. d5. White's getting a lot of space here. h4. Here we go. Love King's Indian. Knight d4. Hitting the bishop. Bishop comes back. Black wants that light squared bishop. He's going to try to hold on to him if he can. Especially there. It would have been a very bad trade. After knight takes, pawn takes, and pawns are a mess. c5. Interesting, instead of c5 might have been h3, a5, b5, knight to g5. And you can see there's some wild stuff coming. After c5, d takes. Now, interesting enough, if he had gone h3 again, a5, b5, knight to g5. Oh, went over that already, my error. Sorry about that. 17, d takes c5. B takes. Now look at this space white has. All this space is his. His pawns control these squares here. It shows almost a point advantage for white, but I'll tell you what, it's a hell of a lot easier to play for white than it is for black right here. Queen takes c5. Queen to b3. He's threatening the b pawn. Queen to b6. Now, interesting might have been queen to a5 and knight c to b5. After queen to b6, knight c to b5, c5. Now it's going to start getting crazy. D takes en passant. B takes. I don't know if I like that much. Both of these pawns are isolated now. But I'll tell you what, when you're dealing with King's Indian craziness, there are no rules. After B takes c6, knight to d6. And I'll tell you, it's only about a 3/4 of a pawn advantage for white here. But I gotta tell you though, it seems a lot easier to play white. We'll see how this goes. Of course, this King's Indian, anything can happen, and usually does. Rook to f8, of course. So he's got to guard this pawn. That knight's going to sit there for a while. Bishop to a3 to guard the knight. Queen takes, a takes. Now that pawn's kind of vulnerable, I got to admit. This pawn here, we'll see how that works out. You know, you've got to use your minor pieces to guard your pawns. It kind of brings down your game a little. Rook f to b8. Knight takes. Bishop takes. Rook takes. Rook takes. Now let's look at this here. We've got, technically, black's up a pawn. White's up what I call the minor exchange. That's a bishop for a knight. And what would you do here as white? You know, your rooks are kind of disconnected. Your rook on c6 is guarding a knight. We'll see how this goes. It's easier to play, but I'm not really that thrilled with white's position. Bishop to c5. Knight to g5. Now he's got to get that knight out. It's been sitting there for a long time out of play. It's almost like being temporarily a piece down. Bishop c4. Now I like this much better. The bishop can come here, go this diagonal. It can certainly go to this diagonal now. This diagonal on the king. I like this a lot better for white. Rook b to b8. He sacrifices the pawn. Knight takes. Rook to c7. Now what would you do here? This is where black, Fabiano Caruana, kind of miscues. Pretty badly too, I might add. What would you do here? I'll tell you, the computer makes two suggestions, and I happen to agree with them both, even when I analyze the game here. Is you go rook here, forcing the trade of rooks, or you move the king up. One of the two, and give the piece back. Because technically right now black's up a piece. He goes rook to f8. Big mistake. After rook to c8, bishop takes, king to h7, rook takes, rook takes. You can live with that as black. Two bishops against a knight and a bishop, it'll be tough. And it'll be a long, hard struggle, but you can manage it. I mean, you got two isolated pawns here, here and here, but you could make it work. After rook to f8, bishop takes, rook takes a7, knight to g4. And it's looking awfully good for white. He's got a rook and a pawn for two knights. Now, granted, a pair of knights can raise havoc on you. We'll have to see how it works out. Bishop to d5. Now, I like h3 better. Kicking the knight moves, bishop moves, bishop. I like that a little bit better for white, to be honest with you. After bishop to d5, bishop h6. If he had gone bishop here instead, h3, knight to f6, I like that a little bit better for black. Bishop to h6, rook to e7. No, you're going right after the isolated pawn. I think maybe, though, instead, after bishop to e5, h3, oh, excuse me, after rook to e7, I think better instead might have been for white. Bishop takes, knight takes pawn, rook to b1. Of course, we all see why. Pawn takes, bishop takes with check, picking up the rook. So that's why that pawn was in Prix. Rook to b1, knight to e5. I think might have served, but have been a little bit better. After rook to e7, bishop to g5, rook takes, knight to f6, rook on e to d4. Of course, that's always good to keep your rooks connected. Now that he's up, well, I shouldn't say the exchange, he kind of is. He's got a rook and two pawns for two knights. I think rook to e6 might have been interesting. Because after knight takes, rook takes, it simplifies things down fairly easily. Now, this pawn is vulnerable. After rook e to d4, knight takes d5, rook takes h3. Just if you're curious what the score is on the computer, white's up about a pawn and a half, a little bit less. I think instead of h3, rook to a8 for black, and then g3 might have been playable. After h3 for black, f4. Bishop to d8. And those of you that like endgames, this is going to end up being a very weird endgame, you'll see. G takes. Honestly, with the queens off the board, I might have considered moving the pawn. Not sure what I would do on that one, to be honest with you. After G takes, bishop b6. Now this pawn here is in trouble. So the king has to come up. If he had gone king to g7 instead of bishop b6, I think it would have been a hair better, in my opinion. After rook to b1, g5, and then f5. I know he's got two passed pawns here. I think black can hold that. It's a lot different than what happens. Bishop to b6, king to f2, of course, guarding the pawn. If he had tried guarding the pawn with a rook, he would have gone rook there and bishop d8. I think it's a little bit better for white, but not that much. Knight to h6, he's got to get his minor piece in the game. King to f3. We all know in the end games, your king's an important piece, with queens off the board especially. Knight to f5. e4, starting to get his pawns rolling here. Knight to e3. Rook to d6. Interesting. Interesting. He let him fork him. After rook to d6, knight takes, rook takes check first. What do they call that? The intermezzo move, the in-between move. If he had taken b6 first and then king to g7, and I'll tell you the truth, I think black can draw this. But after he takes the g-pawn with check, the king moves, and then he takes the bishop. Much, much different. With that g-pawn being gone, what we're looking at now is a strange endgame for you endgame aficionados. We've got 4 pawns against the knight. Unfortunately, they're not connected, all of them. These are isolated because he had to take here earlier. But this is an interesting endgame, and currently white is up almost 2 points. Rook to h8 goes right after the pawns immediately. Rook to b7 check. Get his king up. And this is where Grischuk miscues, and miscues badly. e5 completely throws the advantage away. And I'll show you why. After rook to d7, knight to c3, rook to c7, it's looking awfully good for white here. After e5, completely throws away his advantage. King comes up. You're thinking, well, good, the king's boxed in. Well, not really. Rook to f7, king to e6, rook to f6 check. Now, those of you that like to study end games may want to pause the video now and then towards the end here just to get an idea what you would have done. King to e7, rook to d6. Knight's got to move, of course. f5. That's the reason he can move, get the extra move by threading the knight. Wants to go e6, first chance he gets. Rook takes h3, check. King to f4. Rook takes h2. It gives up both of those pawns. Now it is 0.00. It's dead drawn now. Unfortunately for Grischuk, he threw the win away. f6 check. King to e8. e6. Even though those pawns look incredibly menacing. Rook to f2 check. King. Rook to e2. King. Rook to f2, e2, you get the idea, back and forth, king f5, and it's a draw by 3-fold repetition. That's a shame for Grischuk, and a narrow escape for Caruana. I think Grischuk was tired, or mentally, he was fatigued. I think he lost yesterday. I'm not sure what, at this exact moment what the schedule is this week, whether they have a rest day tomorrow or not. The schedule is going to be shown at the beginning of this video, and some pictures of the players and some other things. Anyway, folks, that's the video for today. Round 4, FIDE Grand Prix in Paris 2013. Just to keep tabs, my buddy Carl Nakamura from the US drew today. It was somewhat an uneventful game. I think he played Wang Hao from China. It was an okay game, but it just ended up in a rook and pawn ending at the end. In this tournament, you're not allowed to offer draws. Without, I think you have to ask the arbiter. Which is interesting, but you know, they were talking about that after, and how Wang Hao and Nakamura's game was a dead draw. 3 rooks on each side connected, or 3 pawns on each side with a single rook each. Dead drawn. And eventually they'll get it drawn, or they have to do kind of a repetition on purpose. And these guys know when dead draws are dead draws, and they see a player is going to do a repetition, they'll do it as well, just so they can draw it and get around the rules. But I understand there's too many draws in a lot of these big tournaments, and it brings down viewership. But hopefully we'll strike a happy medium on some of the rules on offering draws. Anyway, folks, I want you all to remember that if you think chess is just a game, you're not playing it right. And I hope to see all of you in my next video. And I also want to thank all my dozens of new subscribers. And thanks for the hundreds, if not thousands, of views that I'm starting to get in some of my videos. I very, very much appreciate it. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
Look at that. That's beautiful. It's got to be one of the most proud moments of my life, I guarantee you.